No bantering? Really?
I was being nice.
This is serious.
Yeah, wow. This was very serious.
We're not supposed to be
This
serious.
was a very serious entry. I mean...
Well, you could have started it. You didn't do anything.
Look, I can't always play the what do you call the Chester?
That's your role. That's your role.
No,
that is your role. That is your role.
It's one of them, but I didn't want to be the one all the time.
Hello, Soul Questers. Thanks for joining us again, and Chester. Thanks for joining us again for our part 2 of Dr. Bryan Reuther's interview.
Yay.
It's great to be here.
Yay.
I wish we need to have like that side effect? No,
we do have a side effect.
That goes like this?
That claps, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we haven't tested it out yet.
Wow.
Should we test it out right now?
We're super. No.
We'll do it another time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But we're super happy to have you back.
It's great to be back.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's exciting.
To continue a very exciting we left off on a high note.
High note, yeah.
Yeah. We're going to end on a
powerful note. I think.
Very
powerful
powerful.
note.
Yeah.
I thought so.
Absolutely. Yes. So, yeah. Let's continue.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
Let's continue.
Let's continue.
All right. Oh, you want me to go? That's the cue. Like, go ahead and get started.
You start. I started. Now you continue. How's that?
I love your delegation skills.
That's right. I'm a delegator.
So just to recap a little bit from our first episode, we talked about a lot of things, kind of like your path and the choices that you had to make and those fork on the roads that allow you to become a doctor in clinical psychology and some of your experiences in that field as well, and kind of like the relation to the individual and the big picture in society as a whole, and the struggle of those two entities, which is a very it's an ongoing process of development, right?
Yep.
And you mentioned something last time about dialectics, I believe it was.
Yeah, dialectics.
I'm sorry. And I just wanted to kind of I wanted to start on that point because that is a topic that I know that you enjoy.
Yeah,
He's passionate about
it, and I want our audience to understand more about what it is, where it comes from, and why is that important for our individual quest and for us to understand that either within ourselves but also within the culture.
Right. Yeah. I had in the first episode, I had spoken about dialectics in my life as far as sort of this rebellion, almost chaotic aspect, and then the order aspect, right? And so what I mean by dialectics is really just dualities. So it's it's sort of the good and the bad, or the good and evil, or whatever, right? Yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean. And I think that part of and this is very much from the existential literature. I think Carl Jung actually talks about this extensively.
Yes, he does.
In the idea that in a lot of different situations in our life, whether it be our thoughts, our behaviors, who we are, we face these dualities, right? And it even apparent to me that in certain kinds of actions or activities or behaviors that we engage in, it's possible that they have a good outcome, right? That's really beneficial to you and even adaptive, or it could have something that gets in the way.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, I was recently speaking to a number of law enforcement officers, and one of the skills, right, that they develop, and I think that human beings develop, is this ability to compartmentalize things. And in a certain sense, compartmentalizing things in your life, right, being able to file it away, put it aside, maybe bury it a little bit, can be really adaptive, right? Especially if it's something that's painful or difficult to deal with or something like that. But at the same time, you're not facing it, you're not dealing with it.
Yeah.
And you're closing yourself off to a part of yourself.
Correct.
And in a certain sense, limiting yourself.
That is so true.
Way, right?
Yeah, it is, because you saw my interview. So I experienced a trauma, and I buried it.
Right.
And I buried it for a long time, and it surfaced at certain points in my life. You know what I mean? And when you don't, and that's what I did. I just chose not to face it. And so facing it was it was difficult, but it wasn't, even when I was trying to face it in those moments, it was very sort of, I'm just going to, you know what? I'm good. I can just kept burying it, until finally I did face it, and it's, so that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And so like, and then branching out from just that particular point is that, we face these various dualities in our life, right? And, sometimes they're there to protect us, and they can be very beneficial and adaptive, and other times they can get in the way and be and prevent us from growing. Yeah.
Right. Which is what I'm trying to allude to, like not facing it all these years.
Right.
And then, and burying it was that duality, not, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so I can relate to that.
Yeah. Cause on the one hand, it protected you, right? It was able for you to be able to function, let's say, right?
Right. Sort of.
Yeah. Sort of. Right.
Sort of.
Function.
It was manageable.
Yeah. Manageable. Right. Yeah. What I mean by that is function insofar as that it, you didn't, it protected you so you didn't collapse. You didn't just fall into despair. You didn't, at that point. That's the idea there.
Yeah. Yeah. But I would say that there were moments that I did collapse.
Right.
But I didn't collapse in front of other people.
Right.
It was in my own space. Yeah. And then I built myself back up and swept it under the rug and said, okay, I got this. I'm good. Thinking that I dealt with it, but not really dealing with it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why, one of the things we had talked about, I think late in the last, in the first episode of mine, we were talking about the pain and the pleasure, right? And that was pain, right? That's what you were confronting.
Yeah, it still is.
And it's still, right. And it's ongoing. It's ongoing pain. And in confronting, in order for you to really be able to, in a way, become who you are, who you want to become, right? You have to confront that pain.
Yeah.
And so the model of maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain, which is oftentimes what we're kind of go-to strategies for, maybe how we're socialized, isn't really what has to happen. Now, that's a lot easier said than done, obviously.
Of course.
But confronting that pain is really an important part of that learning process.
Yeah.
So one of the things that this is a perfect conversation to segue into a new venture, something new that you're doing, which is getting your doctorate in philosophy. Yeah. Right, correct?
Because getting a doctorate or getting your PsyD, because you're a psychologist, and then that just wasn't enough pain.
Talk about pain, right?
Pain. Yeah. So you decided to embark on this other aspect.
But so obviously there was you had another why question, which led you to this. And I always loved, personally, as a layman, I love the merge of mythology and philosophy because I believe that it encompasses a lot of the same themes in terms of the individual in relation to society. So one of the things that you both were talking about is the things that we choose to avoid eventually become part of our monsters that happen inside. You mentioned Carl Jung, and he talks about the anima, the animus, the self, the ego,
the shadow,
and the shadow,
right?
And the shadow. So
Omar said, and I don't know if you've been able to watch it yet, but in his interview, and nobody's watched it yet, but one of the things that he said is that he's confronted his shadow.
Right.
He's friends with his shadow.
We're familiar with each other.
You said you were friends. I think you said friends. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, anyway, we're kind of friends. I need him. He needs his time to play and stuff. And he gets his time. But can you talk about that particular aspect because it is something that if we suppress it for too long and when we don't confront it, both as an individual and as a society, it's something that can manifest in our lives in a very negative way and in a very destructive way.
Right.
And how does a person, just a regular average person, is able to identify, oh my God, that duality, that positive impulse, the negative impulse, is within me. Mm-hmm. And I have the potential to destroy or create. How does a person come to terms with that, and how do they deal with that?
Right. I mean, that's one of the most challenging things, aspects, journeys that a person can embark upon. Right. I mean, look, the shadow. I mean, if you think about it from a Jungian standpoint, right, the shadow is a source of darkness. We see the shadow archetype in popular culture in a variety of different figures, right? We see, going to Star Wars,
Darth Vader,
right?
The Joker,
right?
Yes.
The Joker, yes, I would say the Joker's also the trickster.
That's true. He's another archetype.
Right. We can talk about that one another time.
That's another.
But
time.
there's elements of that. So, but also we have from a more religious context, we have Satan.
Yes.
Right? So the evil part, right? Mm-hmm. And so, we have a lot of interesting basis for that dark side of humanity, really, is that the response for the shadow. At the same time, then, this is the duality, this is the dialectic, right? Yeah. There's the positive outcropping of the shadow insofar as the source of creativity.
Yes.
And here it is, right? So if you look at like some of the most interesting works of art, music, and the creative endeavors, literature, right? It comes from pain. It comes from a darkness.
Oh yeah,
right.
Sure.
And that's a way that folks have been able to, in a certain sense, meet their shadow to be able to create. I think what Carl Rogers calls a novel relational product. What he basically means is like something that's new and fresh.
Yeah.
That is relational in a sense that it connects with other people, right? Yeah. So like, for example, we listen to a song and we can feel the pain that the person experienced because it's our pain.
Because it's our, yes.
Right.
So then that leads me to that leads me into these themes, right? In both religion, mythology, philosophy. Right. It transcends cultures. It transcends races. I mean, I could look at a Nordic mythology right now and see the exact same parallels with the Aztecs at the Incas, and vice versa with other cultures. So inherently, is this something that is talking about our humanity as a whole and in the macro sense, but also in the individual sense?
Right. Human beings are storytellers.
Correct.
I think this is an important thing. One way that we attempt to understand what the actual hell is going on around us, right, is by trying to tell a story about it.
Yes.
And I also think that's one of the reasons why one of the issues that we face with modern society is I think we stopped listening to stories. And I'll give you an example of this. Historically, cross-culturally, and there's certainly a lot of cultures that still engage in this practice. And I'm speaking in a more broad way in kind of a Western tradition here, Western sort of modern tradition here. But one of the ways that you were able to transfer or transmit a cultural knowledge was through the elders of a particular group.
Yes.
Right. And this is part of the storytelling. An oral history is another way of thinking about it. And what you see now is how do we treat our elder population?
Oh, partly. We want to just keep them aside.
That's right.
They don't exist.
And I actually think that that's part of our fear of death.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
We want to separate ourselves away from, because they represent the end of life. Right. And so we stop listening to them. We say, oh, there's grandpa going on about that thing again. You just ignore him, kind of thing. And you're losing an oral history there. And I think that is one sign, I think, of a society that is starting to lose meaning. Is that we're starting to lose sight and lose contact with our storytellers. Again, not all. There's certainly pockets of culture that still embrace that particular view, but I think by and large, look at the amount of the elder population that are institutionalized in some format, right?
Yeah.
Some fashion, right?
Yeah. So from a psychology standpoint, a philosopher standpoint, and someone that looks at the big picture,
right?
How is a society able to maintain and progress and evolve if the stories that we have told ourselves to create meaning in our lives are no longer there, and what we have in their place are stories or anecdotes about financial success, primarily status and things of that nature? What does the future hold for a society, our global society, that is devoid of meaning because we don't share a common story anymore.
Right. Yeah. And, I think that's actually a good point. It's not that maybe we've stopped listening to some stories, maybe meaningful ones, and we've adopted other stories.
Right. That's what I was thinking,
and that's probably a better way of thinking about it.
Definitely.
And so there's these storylines of, you need to make the most money as quickly as possible kind of thing.
Yeah,
right?
That's the story.
I don't know what the trajectory is. I mean, I have a crystal ball back at home. I should have brought it, perhaps.
The 8-ball, the one that you...
the 8-ball. I actually have a crystal ball.
Do you really?
Yeah. So maybe
we had the 8-ball. We weren't... Yeah. 8-ball.
I wish I could predict the future. Maybe I don't wish I could predict the future in a certain sense. But the idea there is I don't know what a society like that. I mean, in a certain sense, we're in kind of unprecedented times as far as that's concerned. I know that if we keep on a current trajectory, it probably will last. It'll probably increase in being problematic. I don't see. It's hard for me to see, especially with the crisis in meaning that we spoke about in the last time, right? I don't know if that solves the crisis with meaning.
How can it?
So that I don't. I can't predict the future, but I can't imagine the trajectory is particularly favorable or positive in that sense.
So then and again, I personally don't believe that the myth and the stories that were told in the past through religion, either any religion, are no longer as powerful as the ones were, and we are devoid of meaning. So it is, to me, my conclusion, and the reason for a soul's quest is that I feel that it's up to the individual to make and understand that process and their place in it. Is that something that you share, or is it something that you feel that has to be both from the individual to take that role, or is it something that has to be done as a collective?
Yeah, so I think the answer is both.
Okay.
I think that, from a cultural, from a social standpoint, there's a certain assortment of narratives, right? A certain assortment of stories that are available. And I think that, as we are as we're cultured, we adopt, we talk about being thrown into the world. We have to kind of figure out where we are and make sense of things, I didn't necessarily, when I first started speaking a language, I didn't necessarily choose that language I started speaking, right? It just sort of happened into it, right?
Yes.
I was kind of born into it, right? And I had to kind of make sense of it around me, and then make sense of, other aspects of that, of who didn't speak that language, et cetera, and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So there's like that particular framework to go from. And I think part of this has to do with, in a way of connecting to those social narratives, those social stories, right? Recognizing what they are, and then choosing them again as the individual. So, for example, and this is kind of the beauty of how we can kind of construct our own meanings in life, is that we can certainly take a variety of different cultural narratives. We can take, people come from all different backgrounds, right?
Correct,
and you can customize a lot of different parts of your story. And so I think that part of it is recognizing what you grew up in a certain respect for that kind of tradition, in a way, right? Without being a full-fledged traditionalist, in this sense, right?
Gotcha.
So respecting that, but also being rebellious enough to be able to craft your own version of it.
Yes.
So that if I want to be associated with this group of people or that group of people, or have this particular meaning or that particular meaning, it's the meaning that I chose and the one that wasn't forced on me or given to me.
You have that
kind of
freedom
thing.
to,
exactly. And so if I can just add one more thing to that, I think part of that ingredient has to be ownership. So yes. Owning it.
Owning your decision.
So, that will go back to the individual owning that decision and making those choices, because you make
conscious decision.
The conscious decisions, because you said that our lives are a constant fork in the road, right? and right? Can you explain more on that? Because it alludes to this, that it's the person, it's the individual soul, that is responsible for the change of the collective.
Right. So I want to just back up one, ever so slightly there, because you said, it's kind of a conscious decision. That assumes that you're conscious to begin with.
Oh, okay.
And it's not apparent to me that just because you're awake that you're conscious.
Oh, okay.
I would 100% agree with that.
Can you clarify that a little bit?
If I'm on the same track that you're on, I would 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
I was talking about this in our introductory when we first put A Soul's Quest out there, and I told you we had a conversation about the purpose of A Soul's Quest, and one of the things that we talked about was the fact that in the morning I get in my vehicle and I drive to work.
Yes.
And I'm only relating it to this because this is what there are moments where time passes by and I'm like, what the hell did I just do? Like, where was I? What just happened? I didn't experience that. Like, I arrived here, but I didn't have an experience to get to this place.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So like, I'm driving in my vehicle to go to work and I'm like, wait, did I just go through all these lights and I'm here already? Like, it takes me 10 minutes to get to work. 10 minutes already passed by. You understand what I'm saying? That is like being sort of like, I feel like I'm not awake.
Yeah, good, right. So in psychology, in sort of the framework, we call that dissociation, and I don't,
I'm dissociating that I have to go to work,
and it's not. And dissociation is one of those dualities, right? In a certain sense, that some dissociative experiences can be really, really beneficial. Like, for example, daydreaming.
Oh, I love daydreaming.
I like daydreaming. Daydreaming is a mental vacation. Sometimes it's a creative outlook. But then you also talked about it in the context of, there's a phenomenon called highway hypnosis, where you lose time when you're driving. Yeah. Oh, there's a literature on it. Yep. Oh,
really?
absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's where you just space out, right? And it's in a certain way, it's scary because you're saying, well, wait a second, I operated a 1,000+ pound vehicle, and I have no recollection of doing such a thing.
Wow.
Right. But yeah, you got there safely, and abided by all the rules and everything, so
stopped.
It's part of our overlearned behaviors, right? It's a part of a kind of a muscle memory, what we would consider a procedural memory, from sort of a biological standpoint, procedural memory, right? Now, kind of going back to that dissociative aspect, though, there's that part where it's good, right? That duality. There's daydreaming. I can choose to do that, right? But it's when we don't choose, or we fail to choose, in the sense of like, I just space out, And this gets into really significant and serious versions of dissociation, which are more clinically relevant, but we can talk about that another time. Right. But that's exactly what I'm talking about as far as being conscious. So what we probably mean by that is something like increasing your presence.
Yeah.
Being more present in your daily life.
So how does a person that goes to work, let's say a person that manages other people or leads other people, that tends to be focused on the outcomes and all that type of stuff, how does a person like that become conscious of what they're doing? Because they sometimes make decisions that are automatic, devoid of the importance of how we make other people feel or how it affects other people. How does a person make a choice like that?
I have a very simple retort to that, right?
Okay.
Is to not focus on outcomes and focus on processes.
Okay.
Well, that's pretty.
That's my real simple, sort of.
But that makes sense.
Retort to your, because one of the things that you're saying there is like, hey, I'm a leader, I'm involved in this managerial position or whatever, I'm making decisions, and I'm just hell bent on these certain outcomes, after outcome after outcome, and what you do is you get so ends focused that you just completely disregard the means.
Yeah, but that happens to parents as well,
right? And this is the point, right? This is the really important point, right? And this is like, there's a human cost in the means.
Yes, correct.
Right? Whether it's in a leadership position where you're running a company or a business, or when you're parents raising children, there's a human cost in the means. And I think that's something that we fail to recognize, especially with a society that's so focused on commodification.
Okay, so one of the movements that I see in our society right now is this focus on mindfulness. And there's a big emphasis in a lot of our institutions to focus on mindfulness. But I feel that it's important to understand that, because of something that I asked you previously about making choices.
Right.
It's like life is a continuous choice making in any moment, and sometimes we don't want to make those choices. But it's important for us to be aware and mindful. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with the previous comment that Jesse made, right? As far as if you find yourself just kind of coasting through, spaced out, not really connected to what you're doing, you don't have this presence. And so, yes, you're right. Mindfulness is an important topic, concept, whatever, that's been really, that's been talked about much more recently. I mean, there's a long spiritual and philosophical tradition that goes into mindfulness.
Correct. Yeah.
That may be another conversation as far as being able to pay proper, credence and attribute to that particular movement, because it's been thousands of years. I mean,
yes,
it's something that in a certain sense, something that we co-opted to a certain extent.
Yes.
That be as it may, right? I think the message is still important there, that we can benefit from being more present. Right?
Yeah.
So that we are able to more actively and more agentically choose in our lives, so that we are able to recognize when we're at those crossroads, which I think we're always at that crossroads in life. We're always at a crossroads at some point. In other words, there's always a decision that has to be made, whether that is what I choose to eat for dinner tonight, right? Or if it's a larger decision, about my path in life, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Or even choices like, just kind of, it made me think about the dinner thing. It's just like, do I choose to go steal for food because I don't have access to it, right? Another thing, the choice you have to make too, from a contrast in society. That's a reality for a lot of people. But regardless, I think, that presence, which is what I'm thinking about mindfulness is important to recognize those choices that you have. Probably be even better put, the ways that you can respond to situations that you find yourself in.
Yeah.
Because again, I think I mentioned this in the first episode, where there's just a lot of situations you don't have choice.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't want to come off as a person who says, oh, you always have choice for everything, right? A radical choice. It's not so much. I think the vast majority of situations you don't really have a choice, but where your choice does exist is the way you respond to things.
Yes.
Right. And I think that presence is important for you to be able to respond, so that you can recognize that crossroads. And I want to point out something else you mentioned there too, is that being able to choose, but also recognize the reality that you're not choosing is a choice.
Yeah. That's true.
And I think that's a very important point, because oftentimes people feel shackled, or perhaps maybe hindered by, I don't know how to make a choice. I can't choose. What do I do? Those kinds of things. But that inaction is a choice itself. So you cannot get out. This is the perennial existential issue. You cannot get out of choosing.
Yes.
Regardless of anything. Yeah. And I think that presence is important.
It's funny because people say all the time that I just didn't have a choice.
You have a choice. Yeah.
But you're saying that people do, no matter what. That in and of itself is making a choice.
Right. And again, I want to emphasize that reality that, a lot of decisions, especially if you work for an institution or you work for a company, these choices are being made by and large, but your choice to respond to it is your choice.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And that's where the power lies. I think it's Viktor Frankl says, between stimulus and a response, right? Cause and effect, there's a space. And in that space is your choice. And the focus, I think, for that presence is being able to find that space, discover it, and then just being able to expand upon it. Yeah.
So in essence, the individual, this is where it's at. This is where, in essence, when the rubber meets the road. So if any change happens or any evolution happens with the person.
Yes, and the only hesitancy I have there in what you're saying is that I really want to also emphasize the importance of the individual as also a social body, Correct. As a social entity, right? As a contributor to society, as a contributor to culture, as a contributor to that narrative, if you want to think of it that way. And so that's like my only hesitancy to say it's all reverse, about the individual, specific to the individual and those kinds of things. I want to, also expand to the social being and the relational aspect of things. And let me be a little more clear on that. The point I'm making here is that there's no such, in a certain way, it's all about the individual, but there's also no such thing as an individual.
Yes.
And the reason, what I mean by that is that if you look at who you are in a certain sense is made up by
society,
your relational both physically and mentally.
That's right.
You have your genes, which are passed on from a collection of people, and your ideas and your mentality is also a collection of the situations and the people that you come across.
Remember, we had spoken about being thrown into. I didn't choose. I just grew up speaking English. I grew up, in a particular culture with a religion that was in a sense chosen for me, right? But then I think the trick in that sense, it's not even a trick. It's really the process, the journey, is that being able to recognize that reality that I'm in a certain sense a product of a very large relational nexus.
Yes,
if you want to think of it that way, and then being able to own those types of things.
Yeah.
So then, if I say, English, yes, I'm going to continue speaking that, right? But I'm also going to learn another language as well,
Correct.
Right? Or I'm going to say, you know what? I don't know about that religion for me. This seems to be more
without condemning.
Right, exactly.
Correct,
right. And that's the way you're carving out your particular story.
Yes.
And that's the ownership piece.
There is a concept in, I believe is either Hinduism or Buddhism of the web of gems. It is the net of gems,
sure.
in which you have a gem in the center of the net, and there's gems everywhere, so everything reflects each other. So the idea behind it is, as an individual, you have the responsibility not just to yourself, but also to the collective of the net.
Right.
Because if you falter, there's a hole in the net. It's not as stronger as it should be. So is that, the analogy that corresponds to kind of like what you are saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's actually Jean-Paul Sartre says, when you choose for everyone.
There you go.
Right.
There you go.
So true, though.
And I think that's also the way we need to think. So, I'm very much about that ownership, right? I'm very much about that piece and very much about sort of the individual's pathway. But when we make our choices, there's also that, in a certain sense, that ripple effect, and maybe even that tidal wave effect in some cases, right? Where when we choose for ourselves, we're choosing for all. I think he actually says choosing for all mankind or humankind.
And how does a person goes to that? Because that is a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, it is.
It's.
But I don't think. But in that, when you say that, I don't think people realize that they have that responsibility. And that's really
one important enough.
They don't believe that, and that's the point that I'm trying to drive, and that's the point that we're trying to make on this, for this podcast, as a Soul's Quest. We're trying to say that we have that responsibility, but I don't think people realize that they have that, and that they have that significance within them. You know what I mean?
And do you see people changing and recognizing this on a regular basis?
I sure hope so. I mean, one of the things I think it's incredibly awesome is elevating people's voices, especially for folks whose narratives have been underrepresented, underutilized, or undershared.
Yeah.
As being somebody who has studied a lot of different literature over the course of my, I don't know, it's relatively short life. I don't know if you want to think in the cosmic scheme of things, right?
As I get into that one, that's another episode,
right?
Time
we're just planting seeds.
Yes, we're planting seeds.
Right.
Time is another completely episode that we're going to talk about. Yes,
yeah, and so it's the case that having people's narratives all be on sort of an equal playing field, I think is important. So people giving voice to the voiceless, I think helps folks recognize their responsibility in the grand scheme of things. It's like, and I'll give you an institutional example, right? In a certain, like, if you're working for a place, a particular place, an institution, agency, whatever it might be, typically the folks that are more entry level positions don't have their voice heard as much as the people who have the fancy degrees or whatever the case is, or been there for 20 years or something like that.
Truth.
Right.
Truth.
And so, what kind of person does that generate within an institution, right? Yeah. I'm powerless. I got no say. Yes. I got no stake in anything. And that's, in a certain sense, a microcosm for society.
Yeah.
Right? So people feel disempowered. They don't feel like they have agency. They don't contribute to the social good. And so by raising the voices of the voiceless, or raising the voices of, and it's a simple thing. I'll give you another example, right? When I worked in an inpatient unit, I was a basically entry-level psychology person, right? So I had an advanced degree. And I remember one of the first things I would go do is I would go speak to a behavioral health tech about what was going on with all the patients in the unit. Yeah. And that behavioral health tech, which is, by the way, just for those of you who may not familiar with the structure of, an inpatient unit like that, a behavioral health tech is probably the most entry-level position that exists there from a behavioral health standpoint. Yeah. And I remember when I asked the behavioral health technician, hey, what's going on with these patients over here? And they would say, well, why are you asking me? Why don't you ask the psychiatrist? Yeah. Why don't you ask the charge nurse? I would say, well, you spend the most time with them. Correct. You're the most important person here.
Yeah, that takes me back to, like, I had the pleasure of working at schools for a little bit, and it reminds me of the role the janitors play.
Yes. Right, good. That's a good example.
That is a perfect example, because if it's not for the janitors, and a lot of people, most of the people that work in schools are either migrants coming in from another country. This is the position that they could get that is well paying. But they're just looked at as servants. I mean, I've seen kids just throw food and don't care, but these people make sure that the facilities are taken care of.
That everything is functional.
Everything is functional. Yeah. And their stories are seldom heard. But what would happen to that building without them?
Yeah.
Right.
That's exactly. So is that kind of like
that's exactly the point I'm making. Yeah. And you see that in various facets. But in that particular example, not only do you have the voice in that particular position, but you also have the voice of those that particular group of individuals who may not even have their voice from a social viewpoint.
Right, there are no unions anymore that for them to have something of a commonality. So that leads me to a question. And I know that we're going to get into the SKR process and we're running out of time, but this is a very good conversation. That leads me into the status question. Because in situations like that, in environments like that, we tend to minimize people based on the status that they have in our society. So we look at a doctor. Well, actually, not even. Well, doctors are just run of the mills now. They're just. But we look at celebrities and people of that stature or that quote unquote materialistic achievement as the models for a culture, while all these other people that actually really make the society operate and run and move forward have no voice. And I feel that aside of in the context of race and our conflicts when it comes to race and gender and things like that, we seldom look at that idea of status in the society that is truly measured by material things.
Right.
And I feel that that's more of a detriment than gender and race at the moment, although those issues are really important. If you see the materialistic way of measuring what is called success, those people are non-existent if they don't have that status. And I see it in our culture of our youth. The objective is to make money so that I could have the status, not to learn, not to answer our why, not to grow as individuals, But to get to a status, I always get kids telling me, you know what, I feel bad because I'm 21 years old and I don't know exactly which direction I want to go with my life when my friends are in college or they already have a job. But that status situation is something that is really to me is an issue. Is that something that you believe or share or?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the issues that you just brought up there, the status, the race, the cult, these are all issues. I think these are very complex issues. I think that are going to take a lot of folks to solve, right, or even work towards solving, right. Yeah. And I wouldn't even scratch the surface right now of that, right. I do think that part of to address your concern there, there's this like kind of timeline that people have in their mind that I need to have this particular, achievement by this particular time. And if I'm not falling behind, and you stack enough of those together, and you get people who just absolutely feel like they're, lost and behind in life and those kinds of things. So anyway, so I think part of that is being able to recognize individual journeys, right? And being able to appreciate folks on all different developmental levels. Yeah. I mean, I work in an educational system where we don't, a lot of the students that I work with don't have, are not your standard, like, I guess 18 to 22 year old kind of, right? Yeah. We have many folks coming back for second careers. Yeah. We have many folks coming back for first careers. Yeah. Right. After being, home builders, right, for the bulk of their, and I know home builder, right. This is the way that they craft their narrative. I want them to craft their narrative, right? Correct. Yeah. Because it's an important thing, a role that they played in their particular life at that time. So and really valuing it, So at any point, I think it's being able to cherish, everybody's journey and everybody's path, no matter what point they are, And I think that's one way we can at least maybe push against that status. Look, I don't want people calling me doctor. Call me Bryan. It's a degree. I'm a person. Yeah. That's it, right? And that's what I want to relate to you as. So I know I think that's.
And can that be systematically created? I mean, we have.
I sure hope so. I don't know how to do that, but I mean, the only thing I can think of, and I don't mean to just jump in and respond to you that way, but because I think about this in the institutions that I engage in on a daily basis, right? And so the way that I behave, the way I act, the way I comport myself, I try to model that particular framework, and so that's the only way that I can think about it, is being able to be created and maybe even facilitated. Yeah, is that it's got to start with every one of us. You talk about the individual responsibility, and perhaps maybe that it starts to spread in that sense. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I know that I took a lot of the time for you to do the SKR reflection, but we want to have to do this again because I have way too many questions and not enough time. So, SKR away.
SKR away. So basically, with everything that you've talked about, right, the SKR is basically about going through the process of everything that you've gone through, right? So when we're talking about solitude, which is the S of SKR, like, what is your perspective on that? Like, how do people bring that home, I guess, I don't even know how to phrase that, but how important is that in sort of your journey?
I think, at least for me, right, I think it's been being comfortable with silence. I think is an important part of that, because with that silence comes this ability, or at least framework, or perhaps maybe even better said, the conditions for the possibility that you can start to listen to yourself. Yes. And I think that's what's so exciting on the one hand, but also so terrifying on the other hand. Because think about that, like when it's quiet, the thoughts start, right? And it starts ramping up. And that's where we start, the status questions come in. And did I do enough? Those kinds of things, right? And I think that part of that is being able to be comfortable with that silence and being able to sit with that in some capacity. I know that in my own, when I'm training clinicians, doctoral level clinicians, right? One of the things that I help really encourage them is to be comfortable in silence in their sessions with their clients.
Okay, so listen.
Right, so they can listen to the client, but also help the client listen to themselves as well, right? So I think that's the importance of the solitude piece is that, you know, you can access, or it's the conditions where you can access that quiet so that you can start to listen to yourself, because there's a lot of noise.
Yes, a lot of noise.
There's no lack of other people, entities, telling us what we need to be doing, when we need to be doing it.
So I think we're only going to focus on the S today, because of timing. So and since solitude is something that's really,
I think that's really relevant in all of this conversation.
And it's easier. I mean, it's easier for some people more than others.
It's not easy to be quiet.
Yes.
And to ignore the noise. You know how people talk about meditation. Not easy to meditate.
Yeah. So how do you suggest that people start using solitude to listen to themselves? What are some of your suggestions?
Well, I mean, I think part of it has to do with just finding a place where you can access a kind of equilibrium. Okay. Right. And this might, and you know, I work a lot with it. I don't have time, you know, this, right.
Yeah.
And I always challenge folks. It's like, well, how much time do you spend on your phone? Right. And if you could just borrow some of that time, right, you can find anyway. So that's my pushback.
Borrow time.
Right. You can borrow time from your phone time,
that's
whatever.
Funny.
But the idea here is that, you know, it's being able to find or make time, right? Protect time.
Yeah.
No one's gonna say, hey, Omar, you know,
you need some time.
You need some time. Here it is, right? Or Jesse, here's some time. Here it is, right? No one's gonna do that. You know, so you have to protect your own time, and that could be, you know, that could be a vacation. It could be a day off, or it could be 5 minutes. In the car, in between work and picking up the kids.
Yeah, and a person that's beginning to find that solitude, and they are going to be bombarded with a plethora of thoughts. How do they manage that?
Right.
For the beginners, because that's one of the hardest things that to be able to do.
Well, you have another episode time to be able to embark on that.
I was going to say, how do you get rid of the noise?
But just a couple of tips, for them, so people could get started. Like,
good.
How to just be able to just handle that bombardment.
Give us a starter kit.
Starter kit. Yeah. So one way is, and this kind of goes back to the kind of the mindfulness piece, is focusing on your breath.
Okay.
Because the breath allows you to connect with your body. And one of the things that we oftentimes ignore is our bodies.
Yeah.
You know, if we forget we have bodies before we're too late. And you know, what I mean by that is like we're injured and something wrong with them, and then we have to address it in some way. So breathing, I think is probably the number one thing that you can do. Take deep breaths.
Yeah.
And then when you are sitting with that time, being able to focus on your breath.
Yeah.
And what it's like for you to breathe the air in through your nostrils, what it feels like to inflate your lungs, hold it, and then release it. What's it like for it to go through, you know, your mouth or your nose or however you're exhaling it? It's your choice.
Yeah.
And just notice that. And if your mind starts to wander, that's fine. Yeah. You can always return to the breath.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because when we defined the soul earlier today, you know, we talked about the psyche and the breathing in.
Right.
So the soul encompasses that. So, well, we're going to end here. Jesse, is this your part?
Sadly, we have to come to an end, but I want you to know that I just did that. Breathed in and let it go, and I focused on that, and it felt really good.
Yeah, I mean,
it sounds silly, I know, but
I challenge folks, right, to, you know, in their life, when they find themselves in a situation that's difficult, breathe.
That's the
and see how it changes.
Yeah.
And if it hasn't changed, breathe again.
Yes.
And that's the perfect way to end.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate you, Bryan. We really do, for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here. It's been a pleasure.
You'll be back.
Awesome.
Well, yes, we're definitely going to have you
back.
back. If you haven't checked us out on our social media outlets, please do, and subscribe and like our stuff. And also don't forget to check us out on our website, asoulsquest.com. See you next time.
Bye, Soul Questers.